Appreciate everybody's jumping into the webinar here. This is John MacArthur here, Engineering Manager for the Midwest for GoEngineer. And I've got Cheri Guntzviller, our SOLIDWORKS Electrical Application Engineer up in northern Michigan here. And we wanted to get together online here today to talk about a topic that we get hit up a lot about is what do we do with our SOLIDWORKS electrical data and PDM, or potentially we're looking to go into PDM and we already have electrical, or we've got PDM and we're looking into electrical, and what are the different options to vault electrical data within a PDM system. And there's a lot of ins and outs to it, so we wanted to cover a series of different things here today. First thing I wanted to talk about is going to be planning for a vaulting your electrical data. It's definitely not something I would recommend you just start doing out of the gate. You definitely want to spend a little time kind of looking through some of the information and deciding which way you'd like to move forward with it. So I put together kind of a series of questions that I might ask a customer as they start to talk about vaulting their electrical data. Where are we at with the two products? Like I kind of mentioned in the intro, is PDM in place already? Is electrical in place already? Where are they respectively on different servers, things of that nature? Right? One of the next logical questions that we're going to ask is going to be, what workflow within PDM do you want your electrical data to go into? Many of our customers are going right into the normal mechanical CAD workflow. But some other customers are looking to build out their own electrical workflows as things move forward. And then an equally important conversation is where within the folder structure in PDM is the electrical data going to land. And as you'll see throughout the presentation today, that topic's going to come up quite a bit because of the way the tools that are available handle the location for the data, right? Most typical PDM scenarios, you just hit file save and tell it where you want to go. But the electrical connections, are a more automated process. So, there's different areas where you're telling it to land projects and different settings to be able to handle that stuff. One of the things that Cheri and I have run into in a few of the electrical implementations within a vault now is, that becomes, an interesting conversation as well is, how many electrical projects are there per mechanical project, right? We've seen a lot of companies that just kind of look at it as one big top-level electrical project for a machine. Other companies may have various electrical projects that they fire off because there's a new piece of equipment or a large, scale project. So, definitely, get a handle on how many electrical projects need to kick off as part of a new, overall project. And then, a real important one for the electrical connector that we'll discuss today is there metadata, custom property information that you want to push back and forth between electrical and PDM, right? PDM has data cards that you can search for properties with. Electrical has tons of properties, and it's really a matter of, figuring out which ones you want to leverage downstream to be able to push, pull, find the information that you're looking for as things go down. One of the ones that Cheri had me add to this list as well is what does your SWE manufacturer part library look like? Much to my surprise, these can be in massive amounts of data, right? We've got customers with 250,000 part, manufacturer libraries, right? And if we're syncing all that to PDM, that can take a substantial amount of time. One of the ones we recently ran across was, are you planning on moving your old electrical projects over into PDM, or are we talking about a cutoff period, right? So moving forward from here on, we're going to vault electrical data, or are we bringing in the last year or 2 or 5 of electrical projects? Because there are definitely some nuances to bringing in, archived old electrical projects into a vault compared to firing new ones as well. Very recently, we got to push the electrical connector all the way through SOLIDWORKS Electrical 3D as well. And we learned a lot about how to get that done and implemented at companies. And that's going really well as well. So, one of the questions that we're going to ask as we move forward is, are you looking at just 2D schematics, which are relatively easier to vault than the full-on 3D, because there's 3D data and paths to that data within the vault, and the goal is to have PDM use the vaulted file every time, so that we've got one file source for that 3D envelope for that part. And then kind of lastly, and this one's not hugely important but good information to have, is do you have multiple electrical users working on the same project at the same time? So in a mechanical environment, we find one of the major reasons customers go to PDM is to have more than one engineer working on a big project at a time, and PDM allows for that with its read-write capabilities on independent subfolders and things. Electrical's multi-user environment works a bit different. If you have different sheets up, you can be drawing lines and writing to the database at the same time. So ultimately, it's a matter of whether or not you view electrical projects as their own project per engineer. So if you have multiple electrical engineers, are they just completely working on separate projects, or are they simultaneously wiring and making schematics on one large project at a time? And there's some challenges that can come along with that as well. So we're going to break down the rest of the webinar today into kind of back and forth between PowerPoint, and then Cheri's going to jump off and show some of the settings and things that we're talking about. There's effectively a number of different ways to connect to a vault and push data out of electrical, and I'll speak to some of the pros and cons of those methods as we move forward here. And then after I look at the pros and cons, I'll turn it over to Cheri to show some of the functionality on the electrical side of that as well.
Hey, John.
So
before we move on, just to make mention, we do want to make sure that you are not using SOLIDWORKS Electrical Standard, because obviously with the SOLIDWORKS Electrical Standard, you're not going to be able to use any of these types of functions with a vault. And then secondly, just to make sure, PDM as well. You cannot use PDM standard other than with possibly this first option. All other options, you're going to need PDM professional. So I just want to clarify that if you have one of those lower versions of the software, you are going to need to upgrade before these options are available.
Yeah, really good point, Cheri. And it's not to say you cannot vault electrical data without PDM professional, but a lot of what we're going to show today is the automated links that are automatically pushing data in and tying metadata properties and things together. That's all part of PDM Pro. You can certainly save out and then vault that information in a PDM standard environment, but it's going to be a manual process. So.
Exactly.
So this method number one of exporting to a folder here, I've got just a quick screenshot. Like I said, we'll be turning it over to Cheri to show, the button clicks and speaking to all the different settings. But I just kind of want to go through a kind of a quick pro con on all of these. I'd say one of the biggest pros of the export to a folder is it's incredibly simple to set up, right? You're picking a base folder, you pick a subfolder path and hit go. And it is a very quick and easy way to automate the export of PDF and DWG data, especially out to a network drive, right? If you're going out to a network drive, that doesn't require any PDM viewer licensing. So effectively, I kind of look at this from a PDM perspective as very easy to set up PDF and DWG output task, right? Where in a PDM environment, to do that with a SOLIDWORKS drawing, I've got to set up a task and have a task server and have it fire up SOLIDWORKS and do the save as. Electrical is really designed to export its sheets as these PDF and DWGs. Downsides, if you will, is it's really not directly vaulting files. Cheri and I talked about in the setup of this webinar, like, well, technically you can point this to a local view, right? And yeah, the answer is yes, you can do that. but it's not going to auto check anything in, right? So it'll push to a local view. You can get it to add to File Vault, but then your user's going to have to go in and manually check in those files and move them through a workflow downstream, right? The other big con, and you'll see this as kind of a common theme until we get to the final option, is the end user has to select the folder paths per project. So one of the things you can see in my screenshot there is there's a subfolder, and we have, you know, project 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 selected there. Well, that's great when you're working on project 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but when you jump over to the next project, you've got to remember to go into these settings and swap that out. And to that end, there's really no good way to unify or restrict the settings changes. So one of the things that Cheri and I have noticed for a couple of years now with customers using these first few methods, they'll at times either get confused or forget to swap the project and then hit go, and it will just force electrical data in the wrong place in the vault, right? And there's really no good way to lock this down, nor really can you, because you have to change the project path, right? So that's some of the downsides of that idea, but I'll turn it over to Cheri to kind of show some of the button clicks and get into some more detail.
Thanks, John. So what we're talking about is a built-in spot for the files to land. So this does not need to be in a vault. It could be, as John mentioned, but we're just going to create a location. But the nice part is that unlike every other aspect of the software, when you are dealing with creating outputs, here, these different functionalities are allowing you to be able to create all of those with one button click. So you set up everything, then you're going to simply come in, have your project, and then you are going to use this link that then allows you, once you've highlighted and closed the project, to be able to push the files to wherever. This is for the basic. The basic is then going to be able to allow you. Notice it even tells you when the project is not closed, you do have to close it. And then, of course, it's going to generate all of these outputs for you at one time. So now you are going to be able to just have those there. If you need the drawings, if you need a backup of your project, they are all created, but the big thing is to keep in mind, there is no rollback point. This is strictly, this is the outputs. When you click that button, this is where they stand. So there's no version control, but it is definitely quicker than having to go ahead and push import, export, archive, all of that type of stuff. But when you are doing this, just keep in mind, you know, you're not going to be going ahead and making a change to your project, pushing it, and then having that rollback position. You can use the snapshot manager to create that position to roll back to, but externally, unlike any of your PDM files, you're not going to have any of that control. It's no different than if you were using File Explorer, creating all of these outputs all yourself. Here, we are just allowing you to use one button to push, create your DWG, your archive, your PDF, all at one time, and designate what folder it goes to. That's all the information that you're actually going to get here. That is the information that is provided. And again, no archives. You are going to be using these pieces just as if you had created them yourself. The only difference is that you've got a one button push. Back to you, John.
So with that method, you know, one thing it is worth pointing out, Cheri showed a number of folders there, and those are customizable. You can kind of see on this screen here that archive, the subfolder archive /, you can name that folder whatever you'd prefer. And that's the same with this second method here as we move forward. So that was set to basic export to a folder up at the top. This next one here is showing advanced export using the update files for PDM button. And in a lot of ways, it's pretty identical, except this is actually going to push to a vaulted location. And again, the pros within that are going to be that it does directly, vault the files. And the end user doesn't have to pick that base path the way that Cheri did in the last, show there, where, you can see that kind of BOM export path that I have in my screenshot is kind of hard coded into the location. But then, as you get into the cons, you still have to pick that project specific information location as well. Another pro there too is it's pushing the latest copy of the files to the vault automatically, right? So with Cheri's overwrite out on the network drive, if you will, and what she just showed, this will at the very least vault the data and get some versions within the vault. But this does not automatically check in the data, right? And as you can probably see in the radio buttons on the screen, that's going to be the next method that we get into, right? So this is just, again, a push, but this time direct to a vaulted location. And again, because it's effectively the same functionality to a vaulted spot, there's really no way to unify or restrict any of those settings. So I'll turn it back over to Cheri to kind of show you what some of those clicks look like.
All right. So yeah, under that same area, you are going to be bringing in your project, and you can see that I've got the update files. Instead, I'm going to just pull in a link here and use a vault to select the location, and you can select the subfolder then for where you want in the vault for those projects to then land. Again, you're going to still have those exact same folders, but now when you say update to PDM, you truly are updating a file to PDM. And then when we actually look at the file, you will see that the files are here in a folder. Those files do have a version, but at the same time, they are checked in. But again, you are not really getting a check-in, check-out type process. It is going to be just a matter of having that file available, and you are doing a push when you are needing to. That is all this truly is doing. You again still don't have much of a rollback. It is strictly just going to update those files for you. And that really is the only difference between that and the previous version. Go ahead, John, with the next one.
So getting into method 3 is where you really start to tie, I think, into PDM, and that's using the advanced export with the check-in, check-out button, right? When you look at this functionality, pros, again, are directly vaulting files, and then this does bring into the automatic check-in and out, which is nice, right? And for me, this was where the rubbers really started to meet the road with starting to connect electrical to PDM. Because, all the mechanical, users of PDM that I've ever talked to, they only know what, we're manually doing in those first 2 steps, right? When you save files into PDM, you have to manually go check them in. There's really no automation to that at all. And they've really taken it to the next level with these next 2 methods where, it's a really automated push button, right? It's exporting all those files, dumping them into the workflow, checking all those files in automatically. And then one of the things that, I learned from Cheri is that this importantly then goes and optionally removes the project from the local project manager as well. So if you're going to continue to work on the project, you can leave it there, but you can kind of clear it off of your local as well, which is pretty similar to that remove local cache within the PDM environment as well. Cons, the real struggle we learn into there, is we still need the end user to get a project specific path, located in this. And That's symptomatic of, again, the same dialog box here, right? We've not seen any way to sub out that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with a variable with this utility. And this has been available for quite a while with SOLIDWORKS and PDM. I'd say the last few years this has been in the software. And it's the closest I think that it's come on, short of the last method we're going to show you, which is the electrical connector. And where this really left off for me was we're still have the potential end user into the wrong spot, and then you can't map any metadata. We've gotten a lot of questions from customers trying to get description, project number, customer number, things like that over to the PDM files and get those mapped maybe from PDM to electrical. And this method can't do any of that as well. So, Cheri, if you want to go ahead and show what those look like.
Sure. Now, the big thing to keep in mind here is that these first three options are out of the box in the software. You already have them if you have the software. It's right there in your tools. So that being the case, we can take a project now, and instead we're going to use this check-in, check-out process. So we've created a new spot. We'll go ahead and use this now to change. Now notice immediately that the window has changed in the file manager. Instead of update, it says check in or check out. So when you're checking something in, it's then going to ask you, do you want to keep this project in progress, therefore still locally cached, or are you going to be doing it and completing it where you're pushing it through a workflow? It's then going to want to update those reports, make sure that everything is correct there. And then at the same time, you will then be able to utilize all the other information that it then provides. So notice here, those same archived or those same folder structures are there. That is something that is rigid. You're not going to be able to change any of that. But notice here, I'm going to just make a quick change to this project so that way it has some more information to it. So the software then, when I go to create the archive and the drawings, it is going to recognize that there is a change, and therefore it's going to create a new version. You would not normally see that when you are doing an update or a push. Here it's actually doing a compare of what physically is there. Has there been a change? And now what happens is that when I look at this, I do have to refresh the screen. My way is jumping back into the File Explorer. I'm not as fluent here, but you can see now that there are two versions, which means that you can roll back. You could also see that it was still checked out by the admin. So we're going to go ahead now and complete this project. When I complete it, again, as John mentioned, it is getting removed from the local cache. And then at the same time, it is allowing you to then be able to apply a workflow. So no longer am I checked out. I can change the status and move things around. To bring a file back in, you are simply just browsing when you hit the check-in or the check-out process to go to that specific project. That checkout process is going to bring this file right back in to your software, and you will be able to then work on it again just like you would normally. Back to you, John, for our last option. This last option is something that is not automatically provided with the software, but it is available when you have purchased Schematic Professional.
So Cheri and I have spent a pretty considerable amount of time in 2020 here, kind of digging into the SOLIDWORKS Electrical Connector, and we've made some really considerable progress with it for companies. We've got a number of pros to this that kind of take it above and beyond the first few methods we showed here, right? It's obviously directly vaulting files again. It takes the check-in and check-out to the next level. versions the files within the vault. So, you know, we've got that benefit as well. But it overcomes the last couple limitations I talked about in the last two methods, right? We've got the ability to get creative, if you will, you know, with the project locations, right? Where we can take metadata information from PDM and be able to subfolderize that. And then it allows for the mapping of metadata between PDM and electrical. And many of those locations, as you can kind of see in my screenshot here, are bidirectional, right? So this arrow showing push from PDM to electrical or back from electrical to PDM. And there's a time and a place to do both, right? One of the things that we found in implementing this was a lot of companies had a job template within PDM, and then in a subfolder of that job, they want to store their electrical files. And that's really where the prior methods fell short, right? You can do it, but every single time you push, you got to go make sure you're pointing to the right subdirectory within the vault. Where here, we can write the property of project number from PDM to electrical, then it has it in electrical, and when we go to push back in, the formula is used to push that back into the correct location within the vault. And so far in a number of implementations, that's gone really, really smoothly. For new projects as well, we are building a PDM template that leverages an electrical template, right? So when we fire a new job, if you're, you know, answering one of those, you know, questions I had earlier of if you believe there's one electrical project per mechanical project, we can just fire a new electrical project with that job number already in the folder, and then the electrical engineer just needs to go launch and load that through the utility to move forward. And for me, one of the biggest benefits of the connector is that it unifies and locks down the settings, right? You know, once this is set up and working properly, you know, it just does what it's supposed to do every time. You don't have to rely on an end user to pick the right place and things. There is, I did put in kind of parentheses there, 2019 and forward. There was a version of the connector for 2018. It was more of a client-based install, where in 2019 and 2020, this is an administration utility within PDM. So the screenshot I have here is actually, you go into PDM administration, go to electrical, and then all those settings are set there for all users downstream, which is tremendously better in my opinion. You know, to give it some cons, I suppose, it's certainly more complex to set up, right? You know, Cheri and I have had a number of hours kind of digging in, figuring out what this can do and the right way to make it work. You know, and I don't want to say a customer's not going to be able to do it on their own, but it's pretty involved. You know, it took Cheri from an electrical perspective and myself from a PDM perspective to really kind of hone this in. You know, it does require some modifications to your PDM configuration. And what I mean by that is you have to have variables on data cards that accept the variable information from electrical to get it to tie to your data cards. We may be modifying your workflow to accept the files themselves. Now, despite the settings being unified, there is still a client install. And like Cheri mentioned, this is available, and there's no charge to the software, but you do need you know, license a PDM professional to make it work properly. And it sounded like Electrical Pro, Cheri?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So this is definitely going to be your PDM professional licensing as well.
I think you said Electrical Pro. At this point, no, it's just Schematic Pro. Electrical Pro does include the 3D. So just as a clarification there, sorry.
Good. And as you know, I mentioned, I'm not the electrical guy in the room for sure. So, yeah, so you'll need a PDM Pro CAD editor license for this, as well as a Schematic Pro license of electrical. So I'll turn it over to Cheri to show you what some of that looks like here.
All right, cool. All right, so we're looking directly at the administration tool of your Vault or the PDM. So you'll immediately notice some things here like this add-in. This add-in then allows you that link for where things are set up to map from the one software to the other. So we are talking about taking those variables and being able to link them. Notice here the first part is the link for the libraried manufacturer's parts. You are going to be needing to create a PDF, and you are going to be creating DWGs and DXFs. You will have to select one or the other. There is no option at this point for not selecting. You will also have these options, as John pointed out, to be able to map either from PDM or from electric, and it is bidirectional. Now, not all of these variables are bidirectional. Some of them are only one direction only. So some of them, like these here, the mapping is only coming from the electrical and then getting pushed back to PDM. Now with that, some additional cards may be required. So here we have some additional cards that have been created for the electrical BOM, the electrical part card. This is a virtual card that is going to match up with your manufacturer's parts in the electrical library. And we'll take a look at that here in just a little bit. But right now, we're just going to look at some of these. Now notice here, we've created a couple of templates. Those templates, we're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of the templates, but know that those templates are there and that they actually do allow you to have that additional information that you are adding for the different variables and whatnot. Now, the way this is going to start is that you are simply going to come into your PDM local view and fire off one of those templates. When you do, it is not only going to create a project. Notice here, we're just going to fill in a card, but this card is then going to push these pieces onto the electrical project. It doesn't do it right off. It's firing the template. So of course, right now, that very first time, that template may be named correctly. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like. We have to open it up through the PDM connector. You are no longer using the file manager at all for any check-in, check-out, or opening of projects. You are going to use everything here. We'll just browse down to the folder, find the folder where that project has been stored for the electric. And at this point, you can see that there is a data card. It has two versions because it created one originally and then rewrote and pushed some data into it. And then we will go ahead and check it out. This process then allows you to now have some more control than what you had with the other areas. Now this template we made without any data in it. So that way it was very flexible. Now, one thing you may want to consider is having multiple projects in your project template or in your PDM template, I should say, because then you could pick or choose which one should be applied depending on what type of job this is. We created this one that was empty, so that way it was a matter of that was flexible for all, and then just used a macro to drop in some data. So now you are seeing that you can keep something out locally or remove the local copy when you check in. So that way you do have some limitations to make sure that other users are not affecting your project because it is open in the SQL of electric. It is no longer there and it is removed, and we can verify that by looking at the project manager. You can see that nowhere in any of the recent or all projects does that project exist anymore. So it truly is removed so that nobody can affect it, but yet it is here. Now it has not been moved through a workflow. So now I still have the capability. Notice when I checked it back in, whatever was there Now those folders or that data, those outputs, now all have their own version. So you now have that capability for each of these drawings, or the PDF, or the bill of materials can be released early to purchasing because you now have that. And there's some added flexibility here that we will see later that is specifically dealing with the actual parts. But at this point, we're just going to go back and just look at this zip file. It does have a third version already, so you can do a get latest or get an earlier version. We're just going to simply go ahead and open it up again and make another change. When we make those types of changes into this project, you are then going to, of course, get another version, which that is going to make your life a little bit easier, especially if you've got multiple users that might be either going on vacation or needing to get access to a project. Where it was left is where it is at. Nobody has changed it. You have accountability because you can see who actually checked it out and then checked it back in and see those changes that are being made. So those types of things that you cannot normally see, you now have, because of the PDM, you now have that type of control over your electrical projects, where when you had just the SQL, you were dealing with the fact that the minute that you made a mouse click, that was it. It was done. You couldn't roll back unless you remembered the snapshot. Now, with a simple check-in, when you are at a specific point, you will be able to add a comment to why did you make a change. You can force that comment so that way you can get some accountability from the engineers that are making those changes and see all of that in the PDM for that specific information that you're looking for. So those types of things, those templates, all that type of flexibility, the setting up of extra folders, setting up a job folder, that type of information can all be set up inside that PDM Pro through the PDM template to then handle all this metadata and all of this transition that is truly happening between these different files. So now let's look a little bit further at where we are going. So here is a BOM from this project. Notice that it has a list of the parts that are in this project that were designed. The quantities are there. You have the capability now because it is using the files to actually give you a where used. So we're going to take a look at this just a little bit further. We are going to go ahead and get into the area of the PDM here where the electrical library is for the manufacturer's parts. Now this looks identical to like your classifications. Truly, these parts have been synchronized. You can look at a part, you can find which projects a part is located in. Just by simply going to the library, you can see these parts. If it's in multiple projects, it tells you it's in multiple projects. I mean, that alone is going to give you that flexibility from your electric to be able to give you that information. So here's a part card that we got from that specific device. That device part card got populated not by anything that you had to do other than push a button. That button is located in this PDM connector. Now you'll notice here, I'm going to bring up the library real quick to show you those same parts that are in this library. There are those motors. Those same motors have those same cards that we just saw. But here, in order to make this work, we synchronize the library under the PDM connector. This is not something that is a dynamic update. This is a button click that you make when you are ready. When you make that button click, the software is then going to spin. It is then going to create these virtual cards that are then used to be able to get to these where used functionalities that before were never available in the projects. A lot of people have asked for this. This is something that now is there. It does work. It is functional and accurate. And what I like best about it is knowing where I can use this where used, and it will actually tell me which projects those parts are truly working, have in them. So that alone is just absolutely amazing to me. So I am just excited about this part of this, this new set of functions and features that have been added through the connector. Again, this is a service to set this up for you. And this is why we do ask about how many parts you've got in your library, because that synchronization can sometimes take a little bit of time. Back to you, John.
Yeah, the last functionality that Cheri showed there was really what I found absent with electrical in a lot of ways when I first took a look at it, because I'm so used to a standard parts library in a mechanical world in PDM, and my recommendation is to have a standard parts folder within the vault so that we can get a true where used, right? If we're going to obsolete a part, you know, if things get depreciated, which from what I understand happens even faster in the electrical and PCB world than it does in the mechanical world, right? You need to know what projects that's affecting. So, you know, to get that functionality built in, to get the metadata mapping between them. And like Cheri mentioned, it's, you know, there's quite a bit of setup involved to make sure this is all not only working correctly, but customized to your organization. But once all that setup is done, it really makes the end user interface just a couple of button clicks. You hit checkout, it pulls the whole project down. Electrical, for the most part, does what they've always done. They hit the check-in button, it automatically vaults and versions the files for you, pushes the metadata to the files, as you saw, you know, as Cheri showed some things there. And then, you know, the part that we didn't really show so far in this is really just the searching capabilities that brings to the table now, right? In that vault that Cheri's pushed all that data into, you can go up to the upper right, launch a search, and you can find any of those files by any of that metadata now, right? You know, she showed the cross-referencing, which works great when you know what you're looking for, right? But if you just know a part number, if you just know a piece of the description, things like that, that really goes a long way in leveraging, you know, PDM's searching capabilities. And new in 2020, they've made that even better now. You can do and, or, and not searching, you know, like as modifiers into your search bar. There's just a lot of new capabilities there to find data that was very buried before, right? You know, in the electrical world outside of PDM, you had to know what project that was in, maybe what page that was on, you know, and thumb through a number of projects while you're looking for that data, or just go directly into the manufacturer part library and use filters. You know, so it just opens up a lot of new ways that you can get to your own files and see, you know, what, especially I think the reuse, right? If I'm looking for a similar switch I used on another job, right? It's way faster to get to that now, to be able to reuse the same devices downstream on new machines. So.
Or even when a customer calls and says, hey, you built me a project 5 years ago, this freak drive is died and I need a new one. What, you know, now and they don't have the prints in front of them. Now you can pull it up almost instantaneously.
So kind of wrap things up with you know, our contact info here. I've got Cheri and myself's email there, and you know, if you're looking to especially scope out, you know, what an electrical connector implementation might look like at your organization, you'll probably end up having both of us on the phone. We are generally kind of co-tackling a lot of those right now, because I've got to kind of take a look at what the impact is going to be from a PDM perspective, and then Cheri kind of looks at what all the pieces, the moving pieces of the electrical side of that are going to look like. And then from there, we kind of build out what you want that to look like and do. We then take a copy of your settings from PDM, a copy of your electrical project template, and bring those offline to our computers. Cheri will typically spin up a virtual machine, and we will go setting it all up on our end so it doesn't impact your production environment at all. Then once we get everything stood up, we show that back over a remote meeting and show you what the file structure is going to look like, what it's going to do. And then once everybody's happy with what that implementation is going to look like, we port those settings back over to the production environment. And that last step's actually one of the easiest. You effectively just back up some settings out of the admin tool, send those over, and then you install the client connector software and make the applicable changes to your PDM administration utility. And we walk customers through all of that as we port those settings over. And then customers are live with the settings with minimal impact to a production day. So beyond that, I appreciate everybody's time and hope you found what you saw today informative.